Hello, everyone, and welcome to another We Have a Cave Troll stream. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards,
I'm Alan Mackey, and I go by Orion on the forums.
and we're designers that have been working on Lord of the Rings Online for what feels like a very, very long time now. Um,
Forever.
and
No, not forever.
For a very long time. Not quite forever, but we're getting there. We're getting close to forever. And the We Have a Cave Troll stream is a stream where, we just wanted to hang out, have kind of a roundtable discussion about various topics that are both related to Lotro and interesting to ourselves. This is our third one. The first one we did a while back was, I forget what the first one was. It was like our background in gaming, I think. What got us
Something
into
like that.
gaming. The last one we did back at the beginning of September was all about what goes into building an expansion pack. And this one, I kind of pitched the idea with the tongue-in-cheek name of Crisis on Infinite Middle Earths, where we wanted to talk a little bit about the trials, tribulations, and adventures that goes into doing an adaptation, particularly specifically about Lord of the Rings Online, with Lord of the Rings Online and Lord of the Rings, as well as what other adaptations kind of have as far as influences on the work we do, what influences we might have on other adaptations, and kind of how our players perceive adaptation in general. So, so yeah, let's see. Let's switch over to everything, and we're seeing a lot of like, tell us please, tell us please. Oh, that was in regards to the secret things that we were talking about that they can't know about yet.
Yeah, they can't know about all the secret things yet. Yeah, so let's see. We both started on this project, God,
Two,
2005?
2000, 2003 was my first work on it.
Well, yeah, that's right. That was yours. Yeah,
I
2003.
started
Real.
working on it was Middle Earth Online, and I think at the time, like that was really before the Lord of the Rings movies had come out, at least one of them at
Mhm.
that point.
One of them.
Um, but the product at that time didn't really feel like, at least when I was working on it, that it was really trying to capture that kind of audience. It wasn't. It was more. It felt more like it was a classic fantasy, something more akin to like Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale in terms of like character style and whatnot.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, it went through a lot of different iterations that early on too. I mean, I
yeah,
remember points when it was more of a true cozy game, right? Like way back when, where I mean, there was a point where you didn't really do much adventuring at all. The adventuring. Oh God, do you remember what did we end up calling that system? It was was it the Paragon system? I think it was. I think it was the Paragon
mm,
system, right? Where you could actually choose to be good or evil, and
yep.
that was back when we had the old when it was still tied to the Sierra license that had originally gone around before it ended
Well,
up with the MEE license.
and I think a lot of that was had speaking of like adaptations and influences, like I feel like there were a lot of MMOs that were doing land control systems that very kind of heavily influenced that system where like player actions would swing the control and the physical appearance of the landscape based off of
Yep.
whether good was in control or evil was in control, those sorts of things.
A lot
um,
of ambition, right? A lot of
yeah.
ambition.
No, I think the ambition outstripped the
The
FX
technology.
capability at the
Yeah, the FX
time.
community, the technology at the time, there was a lot there. I remember the first rounds of iteration what we had on the combat system where it was all based around cards,
Yeah.
and you had a deck of various skills that you built up over time, and then those would come up, and you had to use them in the correct order. That was based off of a console pitch, I think, right?
Yeah.
I remember sitting down with the paper version of that and looking at the other designers who were working on it and just saying, "This won't work," because it was just too random. You didn't know what you were going to come up with, and if you ever put somebody into a situation where they needed to say taunt or they needed to remove a negative effect, if that didn't come up, you were just dead. It was just too random in the way that it was going to play out.
Well, and it's been interesting to see games come out in the last couple of years that kind of have had sort of iterations of that system. I know Paragon, um, was it Paragon? I think it was. It was a third-person MOBA style game
Mm.
where a lot of the combat was based around the card system, and then you
Hmm.
had like Back for Blood, which also did that. They,
Yeah, the
they
ill-fated
meet
Magic the
with
Gathering game, right?
yeah, they meet with various bits of success, but consistency is something that'll when you're in kind of higher competitive areas, you want to have a bit more consistency than those sorts of systems
Yeah,
will allow.
consistency and control, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the more you can streamline what could potentially pop up, then the better off it is overall for the players to be able to manipulate what they're trying to do. I
Um,
mean, I think you and I both agree that the majority of what makes games fun to play for a lot of players is very likely the player autonomy and the things that they can do
yeah,
to control their moment-to-moment experiences.
with a little bit of randomness dropped in there. The randomness
Sure,
helps keep things fresh. Um,
sure, but predictable
predictable
predictability is
randomness.
predictability is definitely one of the things that's very beneficial. Uh, yeah, no, I mean,
Well, and then
I
when Lotro evolved into Lord of the Rings Online, or when Mio evolved into Lord of the Rings Online, I think we, to kind of bring us back towards the topic that we're talking about,
mm,
we had to look very hard at what how close we wanted to get to the movies in our look and feel without overstepping anything. Um, I think a lot of our NPCs ended up having aspects of them that were reminiscent of certain actors and certain portrayals, but were distinct enough. I know that there were
well,
often conversations. There were some pretty extensive conversations, particularly around Aragorn,
Aragorn
about
was the
like
one that
what
the one
Aragorn
that
was
killed
going to look like, because we knew Viggo Mortensen was the linchpin for that series of movies, as far
Yep.
as like he was a major face in it, and a lot of our initial epic story involved him. So we had to like decide how close we were um, to making him look like the character from the movie, without to evoke that feel, I guess, without infringing on any
Well,
rights.
yeah, I mean the likeness rights, right? And that was kind of the big thing back then, and of course the fact that we have just the book, the the trilogy and the Hobbit, uh, and the appendices license made it so that we had to err more on the side of being less like the film characters and the way that they looked, and more toward the book themselves.
But I
But
also
yeah,
think like
it was that was the tough part.
yeah, I mean those though having those movies certainly helped us a lot. Like it opened up our audience, right? It gave us access to an audience that we might not have had, and there are a number of people that we see either like streaming or playing the game that talk about like there are certainly people that love the books, but then there are
Yeah.
people that like came to Lord of the Rings through the movies specifically. So being able to see things that feel familiar to them was really an important part for us when we were um, launching launching the game.
Oh yeah, right. It was definitely important to us. I remember the early iterations of the Old Forest.
Mm-hmm.
How a lot of that was based off of time of day, different triggers. The forest. We were. I mean, I remember when Chris was working on that initially. He was really all in on trying to figure out a way to make it so that the maze aspect of the Old Forest and the way that it would operate was based off of time of day, different volumes that you would hit that would trigger tree movement
Yep.
and walls changing so that you could not find a pathway through. And then as we started to look at it, it was that would probably be very interesting to some players, but at the same time, it's that predictability aspect of things, right?
Yeah.
Where after a time you could figure out what those paths are, and if it was completely random in the way that it was set up, that would have made it almost impossible to navigate successfully, and putting quests in there would have been almost impossible.
Well, and I
So
think the Old Forest is definitely a representation of something that when we were adapting it, there was this struggle of the books suggest one thing, films suggest another thing, animation suggests another thing, what we wanted to achieve as far as gameplay was a completely other thing, and then executive level pressure to be just like, well, why can't you just let people walk straight through it?
Yeah.
And we had
Yeah, I
that.
remember that.
That was a fight that the world design team had with our executive team, because the executive team was like, we just want to be able to walk clear across the forest. And so we had to work really hard to both like support what they were asking, but also represent what the Old Forest really was and was supposed to be. And, I think for people that are familiar with the Old Forest space now, they can probably walk around it like the back of their hand. Like they know all
Oh,
the
yeah.
shortcuts and paths that they need to take. But I think we managed to have it be confusing enough for the first time a player walks into there, excuse me, for it to be like a little overwhelming and a little mysterious and surprising. And I think that really like meets the goal of that space.
Oh, I think so. And I think one of the challenges that we had early on was the spaces that were described, but we needed to seed content into, were another big challenge for us, right? I
Mm.
mean, the Barrow Downs was pretty much a no-brainer. We knew the dead were going to have to be in the Barrow Downs just because the books pay so much service to the Barrows themselves. But as soon as we got outside of, say, Breland and into the Lone Lands, like there wasn't really much written about the Lone Lands other than, hey, Weathertop's here,
Yep.
right? Amon Sul is like the big area inside of this region, and it's an important. It's probably one of the most important places in the story itself, and yet there was a massive swath of land that we had to come up with a story piece for, and we had to adapt into something that was viable for a game,
And we
which
had
is
to
why
build up the
it ended up that way.
peoples and whatnot there
Yeah,
too. Like, um,
who
the
were they?
one
And I mean,
one thing I see often come up to, as it kind of relates to the Lone Lands, but just in general, those first several regions of the game is, when I'm doing my world focused streams, I'll often see, or when I'm engaging on the message boards and whatnot, I'll often see people being like, well, couldn't you make this area of the game that already exists bigger, or couldn't you rescale this game and make the Shire more accurate to what the Shire should be? And at least in those initial regions, like when we were adapting them, we were saddened a little bit to kind of condense it down, but also very aware that for new players, kind of forcing them to have to contend with this big, massive open landscape doesn't really feel great. Like being able to drop into the Shire and kind of quickly be able to feel like you've experienced several different slices of life within the Shire just by running around for like 10 minutes, I think is really valuable for a new player. Really valuable for a new experience. So you feel like you're getting a variety of what the world has to offer. And then as you progress through the game, the regions get broader, they get bigger, they get more open. And I feel like that's a good way to kind of help bring players into the world. And then, you get to something like we just released with the Valley of Ickerbarn, where admittedly we maybe built too much. I'm sure the
maybe
content designers would be like, "You built too much, Matt. You
we
built too
did.
much."
We built too much. There's no doubt that we built too much. It's funny though when you bring up how things were kind of sequestered in the beginning and a little tighter in the field. I think that's also kind of indicative of the time frame where the game was initially made, right? Because back then your initial experience in most MMOs was kind of an encapsulated experience. There were
Hmm.
not many games out there that kind of threw you to the wolves, so to speak. When we can both look at it and say that the first game we worked on was very much that way, where you entered a world and it was not initially at least, it didn't put you into a place where you were learning the game. It was more, here you go, big wide open world. Don't run in the wrong direction, right with Ashron's Call.
Yeah.
And then when we kind of looked at things and the way that the games were tracking and MMOs were developing and moving, I should say changing, right, and the way that they're trending, we did take we did take some cues from other games to construct that early experience. And I think one of the big mandates that we had, not just from the executive team, but from the probably the license, was establishing the very fact that this was a Tolkien. It was a true to the Tolkien story game, right? And that lore was going to play a very significant part in this, which is why those initial experiences were very heavy into characters that were recognizable from the story itself, whether they were from the movies or they were from the books, mostly from the books, right? But I think it was that smattering and that tying together of, as a human and a hobbit, you initially met Aragorn, and then you got to see the Ringwraith almost immediately, and as an elf and a dwarf, you got to meet Elladan, Elrahir, and Elrond.
And you
Uh,
get Gandalf right off the bat.
you get Gandalf right off the bat, right? Like you hit a lot of the big T moments, as we would call them, early on, so that you knew this was definitely going to be a Tolkien story. And I think one of the things that we were able to do with the initial release of the game was really inject a lot of that understanding and the passion that we have for the game, for the lore, for the story itself. And I think we've done a fairly good job of holding true to that over the interim years.
So one thing you just mentioned was Big T. Why don't we talk, because I'm not sure people watching this might understand the concept behind Big T, Little T, Medium T. But these are
True.
phrases
Sorry.
that we used internally when we were doing this work initially. So and I think as more of a content design focused person at the time, you might be better to talk to what that means to you
Yeah.
and to the game.
Yeah, no, obviously Big T was anything that was that had a direct line back to the lore, that had a direct line back to passages from the direct story. Anything that referenced the world at large, or characters that were lesser known, those were considered the little T moments. And the big T moments were anytime you got to meet a main character. If you met a Frodo, or you met Bilbo, or you met Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, whomever it was, like that whole aspect was, these are the big T moments. Like the first time you go onto Weathertop, we considered that to be a very big Tolkien moment. That getting to the
Yep.
top of Weathertop, you should feel the gravitas, and you should feel the presence that was there, even though you didn't arrive at the same time that Aragorn, Frodo, and the hobbits were there. You wanted to feel the what really had happened there and why it was so important. So that turned into, we had a bunch of little T characters, being with the Rangers being there, because Rangers are a well-known portion of the story, right? They're a well-known race of people that are in the story, but they were never really named. So when we actually put the Ranger at the base, and he was the one that led you up Obama Sul, rather, to the top of Weathertop. It was considered a little T moment, and then we had the big T moment when you fight the troll at the end, right? So there was seated inside of these stories were the little T, big T moments, and yeah, I usually talk like that, and it's funny, Matt, because you do that all the time. No, I shouldn't say that. I do that all the time, where I will use a lot of the internal vernacular, because it's just kind of the way that I do things. And you're right. Like, I never really think about it, especially when talking to other members of the dev team, that some people aren't going to understand when we say things like big T, little T.
It's a really effective shorthand, though, for when we're talking about things that we want to bring from the books into the game, and knowing the level of importance that those things have. Like, the gates into Moria. Like, that is a big T moment. Your conflict with the
Yep.
Watcher. Spoilers, but it's been 15 years. But like that's like the big T moment that kicks off that first expansion pack for you. The cinematic with Galadriel destroying Dol Guldur. Like, that's a big T moment. There are these massive beats within the stories, within the literature, that we want to incorporate into the game. And when we can find ways to involve players in those, that's like really exciting. And now, like, to some degree, like where we're at now, since we're in these lesser written about areas, it's actually a little bit harder to find those big team moments, and we have to like look to what's plausible to bring those moments into the game experience for players. What characters can we
Yeah.
incorporate that are going to act as those big anchor points? And sometimes those characters that are things that exist in the lore already, and sometimes they are characters that we ourselves have built up over time that players have really attached themselves to. Like going
Yeah.
through the Great River and Rohan, you kind of had that secondary fellowship with Koradan
Yep.
and Nona and Horn and whatnot, and those for a lot of players, while there certainly was the conflict in Rohan, which was kind of our big T for that expansion pack, that smaller storytelling with those characters um, really kind of maybe those are like the turbine T at the time, or what we're doing now, the or the big turbine or big SSG, like the big moments of storytelling that exist within and function within the source material, but they're kind of our attempts at making the big hooks, the big anchors for the game experience.
It definitely has gotten more difficult. I know that Chris has been very forthcoming about how the the attention that has to be paid to the detail, to not overstep while at the
Mm-hmm.
same time keeping the core of the story alive is getting more difficult. And I mean it's pretty clear that there are aspects that are going to continue to become more difficult over time. And I think that the current iteration of the epic story has done a really good job of bringing in those really important characters in a way that is both uh, pays homage to the core of the stories to begin with, and also using them in a respectful way, to not throw everything out as something that is
Yeah.
plausible, right? I think you use that word to describe it, right? The plausibility aspect of it, and I think that both like you know Chris and Made Alliance have done a really good job of maintaining that and making sure that we're staying within the bounds that we have and paying the right level of respect to the source material.
So let's take a quick look at chat and see if there are any questions that we want to tackle
No,
before jumping into
it's
the
all
next
about the
thing.
servers. It's all about the servers being
Yeah.
down, which
Well, there are a
is
few.
unfortunate.
POW 2908 says I can imagine that adaptation can be hard with voice acting as well. Um, I think I think it can be. Um, I think the harder part with voice acting is more making sure that the voice actors are saying things correctly. At least from my understanding, I don't often sit in on the voice recording sessions, but I know that is often something that Chris and Made of Lions and others on the content team are very meticulous about when they're working with the voice actors, and
Yeah,
sometimes some of those words can take a lot of takes to to get right.
yeah. It's true. The pronunciation guide or our pronunciation guide, Chris, is excellent at making sure that the actors are aware of how to pronounce things. And it can take several takes. I think one of the other challenges is that time is relentless, right? And I know that we've had to replace a couple of actors over time because they're just not here anymore, right? So it's not like the original actors are still available for any of the roles that they may have initiated, and well, some still are, right? I remember really early on we did a lot of the voice work ourselves, before we had parsed that out, and I there's still areas of the game where I know Made of Lions and I are still in the game. Uh, we do a lot of the screams for the captains and for the minstrels and the male humans and the male hobbits. Uh, and if you ever go to Monster Play, well, that's pretty much just me out there. But yeah,
Sam, sorry, go ahead.
we definitely that's definitely a challenge, or has been a challenge over time, is to make sure that we again stay true to the source material and try to keep things as consistent as they can be.
I hear Mirabelle Goldwater snores in her sleep.
Yeah, that's right. That was the first trailer for the game, right? And then I hide the truth behind Durin's lying asleep behind the carven stone. Oh yeah, all that
Well,
stuff
that
from way back in the day.
and those things way back in the day too. Like, now we all we use guild certified
Yes.
or guild members, voice acting guild members for all of our voice acting. When we were first like putting together our trailers and whatnot for what was it, E3 2005, something like that. Um, it
Might
was
have been.
it was us all just like scrapping together and people
Oh yeah,
who had
that
like
was
any
But that was 2005. Yeah.
yeah, like any little bit of interest or passion for theater to like have their opportunity to do a little bit of voice acting. I
Yep.
remember
Yep.
when we launched the game, we were really hoping we could get Stephen Colbert to voice Colbert the
Oh,
Mad, which would have been
that would have been
amazing
so
if we
good.
had been able to do that. But
How many people know that's a true Easter egg, right? That Colbert the Mad, who lives out there in the North Downs, was put there because Stephen Colbert is such a huge Lord of the Rings fan. Oh,
Sam Burke asks if a Balrog arrives when you dig too deep. What arrives when you build too much? Um, I'm
that's a,
not
I
sure.
don't know.
A
Build
dragon?
too much. Yeah,
Dragons?
because they covet everything that's been
Yeah.
built up, right? Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Sure, a dragon, but there's no dragons left, so I don't know.
Uh, Pal says, starting my first playthrough in Arch 8 years ago, it was definitely exciting to come across Aragorn and the Ring Wraiths so early. And I think that was like the big T intention,
What
right? Like
with the big T in? Yeah,
we want to get you like hooked in. We want you to see Middle Earth and see something that is like immediately recognizable. Whether
yeah,
it is Aragorn and the Ringwraith or it is Gandalf versus the Troll, like both of those were very intentionally meant to be world grounding experiences for you, like making you
yep,
feel like you were one of the movers and shakers early on, even though you were still a very low level character.
yep. That's very true. I Ooh, I see a couple of really good ones in the chat now.
All
That's
right,
good.
well, let's get through them.
All right. Well, you can. Which one do you want to go with here? You were going from the top down, so you should keep
Yeah.
going.
Sam Burke also says, first time to meet the assembled fellowship in Rivendell was a geek out moment for me.
Yep, that was
I
pretty cool.
and I think too, like it speaks to our to the work we've done and how we've adapted the game. That Professor Corey, like that is kind of where he holds his classes, right? Like
Hmm.
he teaches a class in Middle Earth, right? Like literally in Middle Earth. So that says to me that we've built things right when not only can it be entertainment, it can be used for education and for literacy and for all of these different things that have kind of brought so many different aspects of that in together into one singular space.
Yep, yep.
Actually, Alta says you guys really made those Rangers great. By the time we're done with Gondor, they are my friends.
That's good. I'm glad. That's important. I think that means we did a very good job of making them the very clear good guys.
All right, I'll keep on going through. Uh, Callan and Dwelon voice actors still say May Gavanen instead of the correct My Gavanen.
Oh, wow. We should get on Chris for that. He's the one that has told us that that's the right pronunciation.
Let's see. Well, what other what questions are you really looking to jump at here?
I saw one. Where was it? Where'd it go? I saw it. It wasn't the stuff about Colbert. Um, there was a question about who the favorite character was to be voiced. Like it would be any of the monster play orcs or urukai that are out there because that's all of the stuff that I did mostly that's still in the game, aside from Cries. But that wasn't the one. Oh, I saw it. Did it get removed? Maybe it got removed.
Fantas Walker says Lorien was a great as a start would be great as a starting zone. I know that it's higher level in story, but for Lorien elves, there's a missing proper elven zone, and now that so at least would it be possible to change to or introduce half elven features. So we've done kind of those, like the Bjorning has its own starter area. I think as we introduce new races and classes, particularly new races or new heritages, that's an opportunity to kind of build out and incorporate some of those higher level zones into your like very first introductory experience, which again like can kind of serve that same purpose. Like you play your high elf and you are like in the battles, against Sauron, like right there. And again, that's another like big hook. So I think like going forward, any new heritages that we introduce in that way would have a similar kind of starting experience that really like hits you with that big moment, that big piece from the story of the game that can kind of like bring you into it and hook you into it.
I found the question too. It was from Glissendist. It was, does your license allow you to create anything in LOTR or the appendix and the Hobbit, even just one word is mentioned? Yes. if we can expound upon a single word, we can use it from the appendices and from the story itself. We can use Morgoth because Morgoth is mentioned inside of the appendices and inside of the book itself. The books themselves. So that gives us the ability to build something out on that. Use any of those characters as they would fit. Everything still has to be approved, and we do have an approval process with Middle Earth Enterprises to ensure that we are still staying true to the product and true to the story. They have approval process over everything that we do because we want to make sure that we are still holding and adhering to their guidelines because we care. Like we care about the product that much and the license that much.
And the further away we get from the War of the Ring, the more crucial that ability is for us. Like I think, we've leaned into that in the past before too, with things like Azanul Bazaar and Mordor Besiege. Like there are certainly aspects of it that those things that we were able to create because there were even just singular mentions of things, and then there are other things that we kind of had to reimagine, things that we don't have the license for, so we had to be creative in our presentation of it because we felt those things were important to represent. There are certain characters in Mordor Besieged, for example, that have different names, or in Eregion that have different names because we don't have access to the names that they would normally be called. But we still wanted to be able to represent those figures, those characters, those story moments in the game that we're making. And even Legacy of Morgoth has some of that going on in it as well.
Yep, definitely. We probably shouldn't spoil too much because maybe folks haven't played through it yet, but there are certainly some, I'll go back and say, big T characters that have re-emerged after a period of time for very significant reasons.
Nanara says, should I use this as an opportunity to ask you about your feeling, excitement even, about possibly adapting old locations in a new light as the Fellowship returns home? Rohan, Isengard, Enedwaith, Rivendell, Breland, the Shire, under Sharkey. Heck, all of King's Arnor. The possibilities really excite me as the final chapters of Lord of the Rings and the appendices present a really interesting picture of these places to return to after the return of the king.
That's a good question. It's a hard question to answer, right? But I'll do my best. There is a sense of finality if you go down that road too quickly, and I don't think we're anywhere near that point, right? I don't think that we while those stories are things we would like to tell, I think all of us are secretly deeply expecting at some point we get to do the Scourging of the Shire, right? I think we know that that's an important moment from the story that we want to be able to bring about. But there is there's a piece of that I think some of us, and I know I do, feels like that would be even more final than the ring drop, right? So even though the ring dropped in Mordor, the story has continued on, and I don't know that we're really ready yet to go back there. Is there excitement around it? Oh yeah, like there's excitement around all of that because it's finally closing out the story in a manner that gives the resolution that we're all kind of looking for from the main story itself. At the same time, I think that all of us, and we hope that you uh, enjoy the fact that we are getting to exist in Middle Earth, and living in Middle Earth is something that I think we all are really really passionate about, right? And we want to keep that going for as long as we can.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a lot that happens between the ring drop and the Scourging of the Shire that is kind of sort of glossed over, and like there are time jumps that happen and whatnot, and I think we've made considerable use of NPC travel times in the game to kind of allow us to stretch out our timeline and provide other things for players to do in the world, so that we're not feeling like we're rushing through the story. I think we introduced the Great Wedding because we kind of felt that there was a need to show progress in the state of the narrative, to move forward in the broader global narrative of Middle Earth, and which kind of left us at a good point with the Great Wedding, as like, okay, we've teed up a bunch of characters, we know where a lot of these character beats kind of launch off from, and then we can kind of tell our own stories from there as we prepare for the next step of those characters, and where they want to go and where they need to go.
Yeah.
I think as far as like revisiting things, we've had some experience with revisiting places before. Like, excuse me, ginger ale is getting the best of me right now. Like we've done Azanul Bazaar, which was a different time period that of the Dimral Dale. We've done Mordor Besieged before, which meant to show a different time period of Mordor. We've done Elder Slade at War, which is a representation of the war of the dwarves leading up to the reclaiming of Gundabad. And so I think like where the story suits us to do those things, and we've done King's Gondor too, most recently, of course. So I think like where our narrative takes us to do those things, I think we're definitely looking forward to do that. Like, I would not be shocked if at some point we kind of make a new version of at least portions of Rohan, because
For reasons.
There are characters and corpses that need to be in certain places. So like we'll get to those when we're ready to make those decisions as far as our narrative goes. And right now I feel like we're kind of in the preamble to LSR's campaign of unification, basically. We're doing the legwork. We're getting the lay of the land before he does what he does in the appendices.
Yep. Him and Aomir are going to have some adventures, I think, at some point. So I think there's a question in here that I wanted to get to, and that's from Noble. Oh, I want to get the name right. Noble Firen. So, is there an official date? I know this is not necessarily what we're talking about now, Matt, but is there an official date for Moria? I've been given leave to say yes. There is an official launch date for the Legendary Service moving to Moria, and it is December 12th. December 4th. Wow, I don't know where that came from with the 12th. It is December 4th. That is our current plan. And we are hoping to have at least one round of beta in between to show off some of the new stuff that's coming out with that change and release of the Moria expansion into the Legendary server.
And it'll come with a travel system revamp too.
Yes,
We're redoing the stable network for Moria as part of that. That will be available on all servers, so it's not just a Legendary server thing. There was some concern and questions about that on the message boards, but that will. We don't diverge content in our data by server. The only difference is events are turned on and events are turned off. So any bug fixes that go in for anything are available on all servers unless those bug fixes are specific to a specific event that might be running on a Legendary server. So yeah.
The other thing about that is we're also doing a balance pass at the top end of that expansion. So the group play is a little more relevant than it was in the initial release of Angmar and Mordor. So there are some, I won't say big changes, but there are some changes coming with the Legendary shift to Moria that I think are going to be pretty well received, and we're looking forward to getting that out there now that the expansion is out the door.
Nanara says, I do love the places you guys are exploring.
I saw that.
I would love to see Area Door post-war. It feels kind of like a good location for more living in Middle Earth opportunities. What with the land being being cleansed of evils and returning to the king again. But I totally get you guys. I dare you to hipboltify the entire continent.
Man, why does this keep coming up? Why does it keep coming up with you and I specifically? That's just kind of...
It's almost like they know we like housing and want to do cool stuff for housing.
Yeah.
Hitbolt is an interesting experience because it does allow for an opportunity to feel like you are progressing the state of the world based off of your own personal state. The challenge with it is it's often, at least the implementation of Hitbolt is very, very complex. And I would be very hesitant to try to apply that to the entirety of the existing world. It's easier for us to build fresh, replications of a region. But then you also run into the issue of player confusion and player division, right? All of our regions are intentionally kind of time locked, so that we can tell the stories that we want to tell, and make sure that they stay consistent. And when we need to change the state of the world, whether for narrative purposes, we often introduce a new version of that region instead. That's why sometimes those world changes are not super dramatic. Like King's Gondor, for example, is not a super dramatic world change, but it's significant enough that it made sense to do that sort of thing. But then we have things like Azunul Bazaar, where it's the complete, the seasons are completely different when we're in one space versus another. So we really do need those separate spaces to do those sorts of things. So when we ever get to a point of things like King's Arnor, the Scourging of the Shire, those sorts of things, we're more likely to have new versions of those landscapes built than to try to layer in the new status quo on top of it, but only for players who are of the right level, or of the right quest state.
That would be the more appropriate thing. The quest state, not necessarily the level. Yeah.
But it also I do feel like things like the Scourging of the Shire, and King's Arnor and whatnot, you want your character to kind of represent the state of the world. So you wouldn't want necessarily Scourging of the Shire as a level 3 character, because your adventure isn't there yet. Your story isn't there yet. So you'd really need to be whatever cap level it is for that to make sense. Or whatever level we would want, but it likely would not be the same level as the original regions.
I think another thing that's kind of important to call out is that recent updates to our technology have given us a little more leeway to I don't want to say go back and revisit these areas, but it gives us a little more uh, a flexibility in being able to address some of these areas and to fix some of these. How do I say fix? In order to revisit them and repaint them in a way that is uh, more indicative of where they are at this point in time. Now, that doesn't mean we're immediately going to be going back and fixing Archit, but there is a note in chat about fixing Archit eventually. Well, before it's really hard to explain to you in a context like this. But at some point, I would like to do what Nobob did over on DDO at one point, which was to give everyone like a behind the scenes peek of something. And I think showing Archit and how Archit is built and what it looks like from a content standpoint would be a great place to show you how cumbersome and strange and unwieldy it is to work with some of this old content. Because that area of the world was built, it was probably built 5 or 6 times over the years. Built, torn down, rebuilt, just like the castle in the swamp and Holy Grail, right? It is an absolute nest of twigs and berries that are all connected in some strange way, and going in there and being able to pull all that apart and put it back together. Anytime you make a change, and Matt knows this very well, even to a neighboring area, you run the risk of breaking that part of the world, right? And then that just becomes completely unfunctional, not non-functional, and there may not be anybody here left anymore who knows how to fix it. So putting in and fixing those specific areas might need a complete rebuild of that area of the world itself, because we work in spaces that we call land blocks, and those land blocks get very full over time. Archit being one of those areas that is just, it's a viper's nest of back end tech that is very scary to look at when you open it.
It's a really cool feature of Lotro, the ability to have that kind of layered world change work happen. I think to some degree, if we were to do it now, we would probably be more apt to use phasing over layering. But it also is finicky, and it's, at least as an admin going into that space, it can be very confusing if you're not in the right quest state and you try to log into Archit. And this is the same reason why things like Mirkwood Landing are not a contiguous entry point, because you actually need the teleport into Mirkwood in order to get properties right, and for the entirety of that region to know what layer you're supposed to be on, what version of Mirkwood you're supposed to be on, even though it's only the first part of it that cares about that information.
It's really important sometimes that we have to, while we really like the fact that you can go from one area of the world to the other, and it's mostly contiguous, there are points where it just makes sense for us to break that up because it just becomes way too cumbersome. And there's a lot of nuance, and I will be very honest. There are things that when I came back after my time away, I did not remember how to do, and I broke a lot of stuff. And thank you, Maid of Lions, for helping me not look like a complete idiot, because there was a lot of stuff that just kind of needed to be retaught to me. So it's difficult when you start looking at all these older things and areas of the world that you would like to go back and kind of revisit and make some changes to, and potentially reflesh out or make more indicative of the current time frame. But it's also very difficult to ensure you don't break something that is an imperative part of the game. So while it'd be great, I don't know that the opportunities that we're really going to have to go back and do that kind of thing without making new versions of those areas.
Soft Snake GR says, we players just need a huge map of Middle Earth to travel around and feel connected. Post-war regions aren't something that he's really interested in. I think that's not the game that we're making, to be completely honest. We are first and foremost, I think, a storytelling game. We have the great privilege of being able to take Lord of the Rings and bring it to you all, give you a world to play in. But first and foremost, we're telling the story of both Lord of the Rings and other narratives that we are making to coincide with it that help make that feel richer. So we're not, while the world is a very significant character in this game, and probably very dear, more dear to me than the world specifically, like the landscape specifically is to most others on the team, because that's just by nature of what I do. And I do agree that there is something very appealing about having great big explorable open worlds. But ultimately, we are building our world to tell a story. The landscape tells a story. The quests tell a story, and it's kind of all in service of that narrative. We're not sandbox. And if we were a sandbox game, like Neo was originally intended to
Initially.
be, then you would have that kind of open world experience. That world where the state of the narrative didn't have as much impact over the flow of the landscape, the flow of the content. You'd have that, but the game that we're making isn't that. It is a narrative driven game that has an open world, but the open world is beholden to the narrative that we're telling.
Yep. That was very well put. I don't think I could have put it better myself.
I might be in white paper mode after last week. I'm like thinking about TED Talks basically. um, let's see if
Oh,
there are
that's a
any
good
other
question.
comments, because we're closing in. We've got about like 8-10 minutes left
Eight to
on
ten
our
minutes,
stream.
yeah.
So let's see what other comments there have, or if there's anything that we want to talk about. Maybe talk about our favorite pieces of work that we've adapted, or things that were our creations, SSG or Turbine's creations, that are among our favorites and that um, feel like they could be big T moments.
I already mentioned mine, right? Weathertop.
Mm.
Weathertop was a big one for me.
Well, it's near and dear to
Uh,
you because you built it like 16 times.
well, yeah. I mean, that was a really interesting, you know, situation, and it was because we needed to get it for E3. It was yeah, that was fun. Or was it PAX? I don't remember at this point. My
I think
God, it was so
it was
long
an
ago.
E3 demo.
I think it was an E3 demo, and then we ended up yeah, because I think I did the demo several times. I don't know. It was a long time ago. Yeah, that's right. Because we did for PAX, we did the Ranger versus Troll for Monster Play.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, it'd probably be like the big team moments. It'd be Weathertop. It'd be Weathertop.
I think and I've mentioned this before. I think my favorite experience, at least in terms of watching the player reaction to things, was the story of Amarthiel and the reveals
Mm.
associated with that. Like the player reactions to that said to me like
Yeah,
the
we did something
stories
good.
we're creating in this world that we've been given permission to play in, the stories we're creating are hitting just as strongly as the stories of the game itself. They are getting players excited. They are getting a reaction, and I think reactions are a tricky thing. Like you want people to react to the stuff that you produce, and good reactions, bad reactions. If people don't react to it, is a very different feeling than being super excited about something or being super angry about something or being super sad about something. Um,
Yeah, I think just thinking a little more on that. I think my initial hidden Easter eggy thing, uh, tying into the little T aspect, and certainly the using something from the appendices, uh, was how the Witch King's retreat came to be, which is I think
mhm.
the word we the Bard Gularon, right, and how that came to be, and who the steward or what did we give that character name? But how that was actually a character from the appendices that we gave a purpose up
The
in
cat,
Angmar.
the Castellan.
The Castellan was the Castellan.
Yeah.
He's still there. It's Mordarith, right? Mordarith is the new name of a character that actually is in the appendices. Uh, there's a there is a question. I guess it's more of a comment from Nenarus about how likely is it that we'll bring back some more of the open world systems. Um, so we keep teasing this a lot. We can't really go into a lot of the detail on things that we're looking at, but uh, a lot of folks keep hitting on it, right? We liked Hitbolt. We liked a lot of what Hitbolt did. There is an important part of the game which, as game designers and as game players, we all recognize as the loop, right? The core loop, the way that you play the game, the things that you do that are used to get away from the real world and to just engage with the game on a regular basis. So the important piece of getting some kind of those open world feelings into Hitbolt style system is to ensure that those game loops feed into other existing game loops and don't detract, but add, right? So it's a very it's going to take a lot of thought and a lot of planning and a lot of preparation before we can really go into all of the details. But these are things that I know that Matt has been working on, and Matt knows that I have been working on for, I don't want to say several years, Matt, but it's really several years, right? Like,
Yeah,
this
I
is stuff we had talked
my
about
initial
before.
pitch for the thing that we're talking about, but not specifically talking about, was probably 5 years ago at this point. Um,
Hmm.
we had our producer a couple of years ago when we were doing before the Shadow was trying to get us to build it for Before the Shadow, but we just I put my foot down on that and was like, we don't have the time. We have to build this. We have to
Hmm.
build this. There are all of these other things that are coming up, um, and yeah, like that's one of the challenges in building something like this game, where it's like you have all of these ideas and there's only so much time in the day to implement those ideas, and
Yep.
only so many resources, to implement them. If we lived in a world where everyone could do everything, those things might be easier to achieve as spare time projects for people, but we don't live in that, and often there are other dependencies that we have, other features and functionality that we need that are not on the schedule for us to implement. So it takes time.
Takes time, preparation, and big events. That's a good way to put it, I think.
So we've got
2 minutes.
probably a couple minutes left. Do we have any final things that we want to talk about when it comes to adaptation and um, to what we're doing in Lord of the Rings, specifically when it comes to adapting the source material, or looking at other media that's out there when it comes to our own work? I think there's always a lot of water cooler talk whenever something related to Lord of the Rings is put out there, whether it's a cozy Hobbit farm sim or a TV show. We're always talking about those things. We're always keenly paying attention to them to see what they're doing, how they're doing. Because honestly, like any Lord of the Rings product that comes out, like, we want to do well, because that just helps bring eyes towards us ultimately as well.
Mhm. Yep, that's definitely true.
Let's see. People are
I don't know.
chatting about the confusion over Castellans,
Yeah,
Mordarith versus Wisdan.
yeah, I hope I addressed that. Uh, what can we talk about? Probably not much at this point, right? It's pretty much a time,
Just about.
but I know that next month we're going to move this to a little later in the day.
Yep. So we're pushing
Um,
it by an hour, and that will be the new set time for these streams. We'll be hanging out second Thursday of every month at 3 p.m. Eastern as opposed to 2. I think that just fits better with our schedules in general. We're busy folks. We're busy folks. Um, but I think right now we're all just kind of in the post expansion pack, tinkering. Some of us are taking well deserved time off, and yeah.
yeah, and maybe we'll reach out to the player base and see what they want us to talk about in the next one, or maybe we should just say here that we might talk about the raid
That sounds like a
and what
good
it goes
idea.
into what goes into constructing a raid that's kind of a return to the way that we used to do raids way back in the day.
All right. Well, let's plan on that then. Next time, next month, we'll be talking about raids, and we'll have a pithy title to go along with that. We'll just have to spend the next month thinking of one. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining the stream and for asking your questions. Hopefully, this little bit of insight into what goes into adapting Lord of the Rings was interesting and entertaining for you all. Thank you for showing up. Lord of the Rings Legacy of Morgoth, or Lord of the Rings Online Legacy of Morgoth, is out there right now. So if you haven't gotten it yet, jump in. I think the reward track just went out today, right?
Just updated. Yep, just updated.
So
All the instances just went up to tier 3. Yeah, that's a
so
big patch today.
So for those of you that were kind of holding off a little bit to play, thinking you would wait until the reward track is in to take advantage of it, it's in. So hope everyone has a great weekend, and thank you for hanging out. Have a good one, everyone.
Take care.